The series starts with Mike, a firefighter, who's rushing to an accident site with his co-workers. His co-workers bring him to a hospital, and before he can guess anything, they shove him to a doctor's office. It turns out that he has been having a toothache for some days, but avoiding visiting a doctor, so they came up with this solution. Dr. Julia, who was about to have her first meal of the day after a long surgery, looks startled at the sudden invasion. Both she and Mike are surprised to see each other, and Mike even refuses the treatment from her. Dr. Julia runs after him, but he gets away with his rescue truck. Back at the rescue department, he thinks about his past that had a young Dr. Julia in it. He's visited by the rescue team's instructor Adam, who gives him some medicine for the toothache. They seem to be good friends, and Adam can sense his distress, but he doesn't probe him about it. The next day, a trainee firefighter named Zhang kicks up a fuss and refuses to continue with the training, as he believes that they're being trained to pursue the impossible. However, he's silenced by Mike, who finishes the task within 20 seconds. He goes on to teach the young man that their job entails running against time, so they have to train harder to make every second count. While they're talking, a building near Julia's home catches fire, and she's instructed to immediately head over there. She runs into Mike's team on the way and quietly follows him to help the injured folks. The firefighters work efficiently, but gradual blasts of gas cylinders make their job even harder. As the fire completely envelopes the building, Mike's team instructor orders him to leave the building immediately. However, he stubbornly sticks to saving a child trapped somewhere when a cylinder blast cuts his contact with the rest of the team. For a moment, everyone, including Julia, gets worried for his life, but he emerges from the building safe and sound with the rescued child. When the moment of terror finally subsides, Adam angrily hits him for going against the team leader's orders, but Mike playfully evades it. He goes on to fearlessly challenge a rich kid to report him, as he was threatening the rescue department for damaging his wrongly parked car in a hurry to reach the accident site. Meanwhile, Julia tries to have a word with him, but he completely ignores her. A flashback from the past reveals them to be classmates from high school. Mike had a crush on her the moment his gaze landed on her, but she used to be quite an introvert. All his efforts to engage her in a conversation would mostly go down the drain. Later that evening, Adam and Mike talk about their past relationships and having to move on. Adam suggests that he opens himself up to receive love. On the other hand, Julia also rummages through her high school memories. While she was a shy and introverted girl, Mike had succeeded in befriending her. She still had the box of candies that he had offered her. The young man had slowly taken the role of her bodyguard against the bully girls in the school. The next morning, Mike is inquired by his boss for a series of complaints, including not listening to their leader's orders and damaging the public property. Charlotte, his senior, puts some nice words forward for him. Eventually, he's ordered to write a 3,000-word report to reflect on his behavior, and Mike leaves without so much as looking at Charlotte or listening to what she has to say to him. On the other hand, Julia's colleagues gossip about her mysterious yet rich background and attribute her promotion at the hospital to her background. She doesn't have many co-workers to rely on thanks to their jealousy, and usually leaves for home as soon as she's done with her shift. That night, she experiences a roadblock due to an accident and rushes to help the injured when the cops on site reveal that the ambulance is yet to arrive. However, her steps visibly slow down to see that Mike is helping the injured out of car on behalf of the rescue department. The ambulance too arrives soon, so she leaves quietly, but Mike manages to see her and watches her walk away from behind. While the injured are being moved to the hospital, Adam brings some soup for Mike since the latter hasn't been able to eat due to his toothache. He appears to have been struggling on the family front, and his conversation on an anonymous call hints at him looking to switch jobs or a transfer. Mike seems to have sensed his distress and probes him about it. However, Adam doesn't spill the beans. On the work front, Mike is seen training the newbies and telling them not to expect fame or money from this job. Julie is also busy at her job. Since her colleagues keep their distance from her, they all look hesitant to join her team when the hospital director suggests making 2 teams to tackle emergencies. A few days later, she sets out to visit the places she used to hang out at with Mike. She also goes to his house in a relatively poor neighborhood, but his sister and mother scold her angrily. While Mike's mother looks a bit skeptical about her attitude towards Julia, his sister outrightly reminds her of the pain she inflicted upon Mike. The older lady mentions the number of blind dates she has arranged for him so far and how he never showed up for them. Moon still stubbornly expresses her resolve to keep the girl away from her brother. On Julia's end, a firefighter is brought to her with a serious injury, but when she rushes to treat him, a couple starts throwing a fit. The husband accuses her of negligence, even though his wife has been treated for the minor heat injury. As he rushes to attack her, Mike appears out of nowhere and intercepts his attack. Julia goes ahead to treat the injured firefighter while Mike's subordinates are scolded for not taking an immediate action when the nonsensical man was about to hit the doctor. He then leaves before Julia comes out of the treatment room, but the girl still follows him out of the hospital. Mike treats her like an ordinary high school friend and makes his point clear that he'd have done the same had it been some other doctor. He also declines her invitation for a coffee, quoting a long line of ladies already waiting to have a coffee with him. As he walks away, he's reminded of some high school memories. He used to smoke a lot, so Julia had once gifted him a lighter case that had her face engraved on it. Her reason was simple: whenever he'd take the lighter out to light a cigarette, he'd be reminded of her and thus quit smoking. After this hospital encounter, Julia visits her family home with her brother Arnold, where she finds her wooden sculptures missing from her room. This leaves her upset, and she questions her mother about their whereabouts. Lady Anne seems to be a helicopter parent, as she strictly tells her to give up these useless hobbies now that she's completed her education as a doctor against her will. Julia is strictly told to engage in some social activities in her circle instead of the social services she's interested in. By then, Julia's cousin Sean arrives at their home for a meal, and it appears that he's quite close to the pair of siblings. He invites his cousins to the new bar that he's opened recently and teases Arnold with the number of beautiful girls that frequent that place. Lady Anne holds Sean in high regards and urges her son to learn from him so he can bring her a daughter-in-law that has an equal social status, if not higher than them. She also gives her kids an envelope each that consists of photographs of potential suitors for a blind date. Julia and Arnold are told to pick a person of their choice for a blind date. On the other hand, Mike realizes that his lighter is missing and spends the whole day looking for it. At night, Adam finds him going through the trash and points out how he doesn't seem to have moved on from his first love, despite his claims to have done so. He mentions that Mike wouldn't be looking for a lighter 10 years old if that were the case. Mike finally reveals the reason they parted ways 10 years ago. He tells Adam about their class difference and how he spent the last 10 years working hard to be able to stand by her side unashamed. But it looks like closing the gap between their status is nearly impossible in this life. At this, Adam suggests that he moves on from Julia. On the other hand, Arnold shortlists 2 men for Julia to pick from. His remarks along the lines that no matter what, they both should be better than Mike give away his suspicion that Julia is still in contact with him. This hits the nerve in Julia, and she suggests going to Sean's bar to forget about their worries. Sometime later, the pair of siblings find themselves in Sean's bar enjoying his top-notch service when a waitress accidentally spills a drink at the table. Unexpectedly, Arnold stays calm and doesn't pursue the matter. He finds the girl quite similar to his sister, i.e., naive and innocent. Julia learns about the security check of the building against fire emergencies and figures that it might be the firefighting department that runs the survey. She secretly hopes to see Mike amongst the officials, but gets disappointed when the official in a different uniform reveals that there is a separate department that ensures building safety. Later, she tells Sean about her encounter with Mike, and he advises her to give up the idea of getting back with Mike as their past won't make it easy. She puts the conversation aside and goes ahead for some distractions, but instead, she's once again reminded of Mike. They had once visited a bar together where she accidentally stumbled upon a couple making out. Mike found her looking embarrassed and not knowing what to do, so he covered her eyes, telling her not to look there. Suddenly hit by nostalgia, she immediately goes to the fire rescue station number 5 to meet Mike, but the man gets the gatekeeper to say that he's not in his room. Not just that, he makes sure to appear on the running track at the same time to show that he chose not to meet her. When Julia leaves dejectedly, Officer Charlotte, whom she met at the bar earlier, arrives at the building. The lady is quite puzzled to see her there after meeting her at the bar just some time ago. Mike finally gets his long-awaited holiday and goes home. His mother tells her about Julia's visit, but he nonchalantly announces his disgust towards her. We finally see the flashback that reveals what actually transpired between them years ago. They had grown closer since the first time they met in high school. Their relationship was officially that of being girlfriend-boyfriend, and Mike even brought her to his home. Julia had really admired the warm and cozy environment at his small home. However, she went ahead and broke up with him just a few days later. While Mike was unable to reason with her, Julia had ruthlessly insulted him for their class difference, pointing out how his small home suffocated her and how he had lost his charm for her. Mike begged her like crazy, but she coldly left in her car. It's revealed that Julia did all of this under her mother's pressure, but Mike could never come out of that incident. He kept running after her car and would often sneak into her house building, leaving a note at her window to meet him at the park. Unfortunately, she never came. The following day, Mike is called back to work owing to a storm alert. Water starts to accumulate at the underpasses, and one night Julia's car malfunctions under a bridge while she was on her way to the hospital. The car starts to get flooded with its doors locked and jammed. Julia calls the emergency rescue number, but looking at the rapidly drowning car, she wonders if they'd be able to save her in time. From afar, she spots some flashlights hinting at the arrival of firefighters, and Mike clearly recognizes her. He rescues her with great effort and breaks the window glass to take her out of the car. As he carries her away to safety, Julia keeps clinging on to him, but he angrily pushes her away. She tries to remind him of his feelings for her, but the man rejects her idea, claiming to have done the same even if it were a dog. He then floats away with his team in a boat while Julia, although dejected, rushes to the hospital. The hospital is filled with many emergency cases, and one of the patients requires urgent surgery to stop their condition from getting worse. However, the team of doctors looks skeptical about it as Dr. Jonathan, the senior doctor, isn't present at the hospital, and it may take him quite a long time to arrive at the hospital. Julia performs the surgery at her own responsibility against the rest of the doctor's protest and finally manages to save the patient. She also prescribes therapy for the patient's young and traumatized daughter. Since her actions were against the hospital protocols, Dr. Jonathan gives her a strict warning regarding her willful behavior, much to her colleagues' joy. Julia, on the other hand, carefully dries Mike's uniform jacket that he gave her on the night of the storm, not bothering about what her teammates think about her. Once the storm passes, Mike is allowed to go back home, only to face Moon's lady friends whom she has invited over for a meal. The girl manages to childishly convince him to eat with her friends to fulfill her main goal, that is, to introduce her brother to some beauties. Meanwhile, a conversation between Mike's parents reveals that he's actually their adopted son. The boy lost his father at a tender age while his mother left him to go abroad. Lady Sophia expresses her desire to teach the selfish woman a lesson, but eventually settles down to keeping her son away from Julia, who is another selfish woman in her eyes. At Mike's end, he notices that one of Moon's friends looks quite similar to Julia. Not just that, she also gives the vibe of a teenage Julia when she used to look quite shy and introverted. This girl Sonia is actually the same waitress that accidentally spilled the drink on Arnold. After lunch, Moon teases her brother for sneaking glances at Sonia and offers to facilitate their relationship, but he playfully evades the bullet. On the other hand, Julia traces his whereabouts and comes to his house to return his jacket as well as thank him for rescuing her. But Mike ruthlessly rejects her efforts, claiming to have moved on from her ages ago. He also declines her proposal to start over and walks away coldly. A few days later, Julia's hospital organizes a seminar related to fire emergencies, and she attends it in hopes of getting a glimpse of Mike. However, it's senior Charlotte who delivers the seminar for a whole 2 hours while Mike is busy training his soldiers. Turns out that his junior told a spiced-up story of him coming to Dr. Julia's aid to all the trainees, and now they all believe that there's something going on between them. Wyatt keeps chanting how he'd like to go to that same doctor for every little injury since she's so gentle and professional. On the other hand, Officer Charlotte sums up the seminar with a team photo featuring Mike that incites interest in many young nurses, while Julia feels jealous about it. She can't help but be suspicious that the pair might be dating. Later, she approaches Officer Charlotte to inquire about Mike and learns that he's one of the best officers at the department. A few days later, a major accident at the highway brings the hospital and rescue staff together. 4 to 5 cars had collided against each other, and when Julia arrives there with her team, she finds Mike already there on his rescue mission. One of the cars had slipped away from the road and down in the water under a bridge. Mike and his team rescues the driver after cutting down the roof and calls for a doctor's help as the man is practically crushed between the car seats. Julia helps administer a painkiller to the injured before he's finally pulled out of the car. In the process, she almost gets stabbed by a sharp, protruding part of the car body, but Mike saves her in time, getting injured in the process. When the critical moment finally passes and all the injured are treated or sent to the hospital, Julia runs after Mike and requests him to accompany her to the hospital for treatment, but he refuses to do so. That is until Adam arrives there and forces him to get in the ambulance. After reaching the hospital, Mike once again refuses to remove his shirt for Julia to have a look at his wound. He stubbornly demands to change his doctor, but Julia acts even more stubbornly, telling him that other doctors are busy. He ends up letting her stitch his wound without numbing medicine. Julia suggests that he gets his bandage changed daily for the next few days, causing Mike to snap at her. He calls her out for wanting to get back with him when she's eventually going to dump him once again. Julia doesn't hesitate to point out that he still has feelings for her, which is why he comes to her rescue every time she's in danger. However, Mike brushes it off, calling it a special case since he once had feelings for her. Their conversation is interrupted by Officer Charlotte, who comes rushing in to fuss over Mike and helps him put on his shirt. Mike accepts the help to show that he's moved on from Julia. Charlotte leaves the room to get him a pair of slippers, giving Julia the chance to continue. She tries to explain that back in the day she was too young and dependent on her parents. She now has the freedom to choose whomever she wishes to be with. However, Mike coldly reminds that people don't even dump strays the way she did to him. Not to mention, he can't bear the pain of rejection all over again, which isn't hard to expect looking at her track record. She ends up crying her heart out once he leaves. Outside, Charlotte brings his slippers, and it appears that she might have put 2 and 2 together as she asks Mike to accept her feelings if he doesn't intend on getting back with Julia. However, Mike clearly states that he doesn't want either of them. On the other hand, the blood report of the person rescued from the last car reveals that the man has a rare disease. The disease is also transferable, so Julia immediately imposes an emergency, demanding that all the instruments be sterilized and everyone who's been in his contact be tested. She also informs the fire rescue department as Mike and 3 of his colleagues had rescued that man, so it's important for them to get tested as well. Meanwhile, the young patient's mother makes a scene at the hospital asking Dr. Julia to move her son to a private room instead of the ICU. The woman doesn't care about the other people whom her son may have infected, causing Julia's blood to boil. She doesn't hesitate from giving her a befitting reply announcing that every worker's life is equally important, especially the firefighters who saved her son. If not for them, her son wouldn't have survived, so she needs to learn to show gratitude. Since the hospital staff has already been given the vaccine, Julia discovers that they only have 3 doses of medicine. That means one of the firefighters will have to wait till the medicine arrives. Judging from the facts, she tells Mike to have the medicine first since he's more at risk of being infected due to his injury. However, Mike chooses to let his soldiers have it first, causing Julia to freak out. She makes him stay at the hospital under observation and immediately sends requests for medicine to other hospitals. She finally gets her hands on the antidote and gives it to Mike, stating that she respects his decision if he doesn't want anything to do with her. After successfully returning to his job, Mike hears from Adam that he's planning to switch jobs due to the pressure and some personal reasons. They walk back to the dorms and accidentally overhear the trainees complaining about Mike's strict training to each other. Next day, the blood reports arrive, declaring all 4 of the firefighters safe. Mike goes to share it with Adam but stumbles upon his application to switch jobs, leaving him stunned. He confronts Adam about it, mentioning how hard it'll be for him to manage the entire station on his own. Adam expresses that it's hard for him to settle down due to the pressure of his low-paying job, but Mike doesn't sound convinced and angrily tells him to do whatever he deems fit. On the other hand, Dr. Julia helps save a patient whose heart almost stopped beating. The moment of teamwork and a sense of togetherness helps her get closer to the colleagues in her team. Not just that, her opponent team's leader, Dr. Bell, too, realizes that she is a capable person, unlike her initial evaluation of the girl. She later approaches her in the changing room and praises her for the excellent work that made the patient's family to thank her. Julia's response that she performs her duty without expecting gratitude in return increases Belle's interest in her, and she tries to get closer to her. However, Julia looks indifferent about making work relations and doesn't entertain her much. The next day, Mike takes out all of his frustration on the new trainees who seem to be making silly mistakes continuously. When Adam intervenes, he scolds him as well, not regarding him unusually. The subordinates notice him being angry at Adam for the first time, as he even refuses to acknowledge the latter's efforts of reconciliation. Meanwhile, Sean meets Arnold and requests him to give his friend some pointers in her new business. He further tells him about Julia's recent encounter with Mike and her interest in meeting him. Arnold simply tells him that she's independent in her decisions, but Sean reminds him that their mother may not accept it easily. He suggests that both the siblings join him at his bar for the night where he'd introduce Julia to his friend Annie. As Sean expected, the girls instantly hit it off despite them being opposite in nature. They even compete on who can drink more, where Julia emerges victorious while Sean contemplates blacklisting both of them from his bar. As Arnold walks Julia to the car, he bumps into Sonia, who anxiously apologizes to him for accidentally causing a scratch on his car from her bicycle. He tells her not to worry about compensation and drives his sister to her apartment. After carefully carrying her to the bed, he settles on the sofa in the living room for the night and thinks about his first encounter with her. It's revealed that Julia is his adopted sister and they're not biologically related. They first met on the night when the girl lost both of her parents in a car accident. Arnold's parents took him with them to take her from the hospital, and ever since, he's been her big brother. He'd do anything for her, be it secretly bringing her toy back that their mother threw away, or a person. The next morning, Julia wakes up to see Arnold preparing breakfast. She tells him about her encounter with Mike and the latter's refusal to give her another chance. Arnold calmly listens to her, blaming herself for everything and thinking that she doesn't deserve any love or appreciation in life. Then, he simply tells her to visit home since she's not working today and their mother has called for her. A few hours later, Mike's team sets out on a mission. Julia is surprised to see him standing at her door. Turns out, they're here to rescue a child hanging from the balcony above her apartment. He almost falls down while helping the child, but makes sure to secure him. Once rescued, Julia helps the boy treat his hand that was stuck in the railing while Mike holds him in his arms. He is seen watching her in a mesmerized manner until the young boy's parents arrive and thank them both profusely. Julia takes the chance when Mike goes to wash hands and asks one of his subordinates to give her Mike's contact number. The junior obliges at the condition that she doesn't give him away. Later, she offers Mike some tea when he comes out of the washroom and helps treat the scratch on his arms as well. He lets her have her way unusually and finds it hard to look away from her despite wanting to avoid her. She praises him for managing such a dangerous job so well. As if getting an afterthought, she runs to her apartment's balcony to spot Mike walking away and shouts at him to ask if he's free the upcoming weekend. He leaves without so much as looking back at her. She doesn't look too bothered by his attitude and goes ahead to check his contact profile happily. Meanwhile, Arnold, who's always been quite innovative in his ideas, fails to do a satisfactory job during a business meeting with the investors, and his secretary immediately shares the news with his mother, Lady Anne. She immediately calls him to order that he fulfills the shareholders' demands and keeps them happy. Not only does he feel annoyed with his mother's strict hold, but he also gets to find her informer. Soon, he's seen interrogating his secretary and gives him a warning to work only for one boss. The secretary wisely chooses to stay with him. The next day, Julia takes the initiative to praise Dr. Bell's hairstyle and purse. She also texts Mike, but he doesn't respond because 1, he doesn't know who's texting him, and 2, Moon calls him to say that she'll be bringing his warm clothes over since winter is around the corner. This is why he tells his subordinates not to have any funny ideas when one of them approaches him to say a girl is asking for him at the main gate. However, once he leaves the tool room, the junior reveals to others that the person at the gate isn't his sister, but the doctor whom they've met many times now. That instantly fills all of them with mischief as they secretly follow their boss to eavesdrop on his conversation. Mike's steps visibly slow down upon realizing that it's Dr. Julia at the gate. The girl makes an excuse of passing by and stopping to say hi. She goes ahead to ask him to treat her to a dinner date since she let him use her apartment like a good citizen. When he refuses, she asks to have some coffee and ends up convincing him for dinner. The next day, Julia tries to dress up for the date, and being inexperienced in such matters, she requests Annie's help. And Annie instantly comes over with lots of supplies to help her. Julia realizes that Annie has freedom to do whatever she wants to do and live however she deems fit. That's quite the opposite of her life. Even Mike is low-key anxious about his looks and contemplates getting a haircut. At the same time, Adam approaches him offering to trim his hair that he accepts begrudgingly. Mike continues giving him a cold shoulder throughout the haircut session, failing Adam's efforts to initiate a conversation. The anticipation brings Julia to their designated place way ahead of time. By the time Mike arrives there, it's already raining. She brings him to the restaurant where Mike used to bring her during school days. He continues watching her quietly as she orders all of their favorite dishes from the old days. Julia continues to praise the food and the fact that its taste hasn't changed over the years, but Mike doesn't agree with her. He thinks that the food doesn't taste the same, or maybe that's because his own taste has changed over time, and he doesn't like what he used to at one time. Mike finishes early while she continues to take her time to keep him beside her, even if just for a little longer. However, he calls her out on intentionally acting cute and walks out of the restaurant telling her to finish soon while he waits outside. By the time she comes out, he gets a call from Moon asking for his help from the police station. Julia offers to drive him there, to which he agrees considering the emergency of the situation. However, he feels too uncomfortable in her luxury car and tells her not to use any of her connections to help him. Julia learns that Moon is a smart girl and studies at a prestigious university. She follows Mike inside the police station against his advice, causing Moon to be upset about it. However, the topic soon shifts to the reason for her being in custody. Turns out was caught selling some fake stuff and was now refusing to give any details related to her supplier, causing her detention. At this point, Julia steps in and asks to be left alone with the girl for a few minutes. She then goes on to explain the legal problems Moon may get in, including getting expelled from her university and putting her brother in trouble. Moon finally relents and reveals that she's been working a part-time job as a salesperson for her client and gives his contact information to the department. However, the number has long been deactivated, and she's fined a heavy amount for all the fake stuff she's sold so far. Not only is it hard to gather so much money at a short notice, the sold items also turn out to be smuggled, and Moon is to be kept in custody until the person behind the scam is caught. Julia decides to get Sean's help, who happens to be with Arnold. She can't directly use her account because of her mother's strict eye on her movements, so she turns to Sean for help, but Arnold also learns about the situation. They both arrive at the center, and Arnold's face makes Mike flare up as he asks Julia to leave with them. Once again, it takes some persuasion on Julia's part for him to allow Arnold to intervene in order to protect his sister's future. The Inspector General of the department soon arrives there to facilitate Arnold. That not only helps them to get Moon released, but also makes Mike acutely aware of their class difference. Even Moon refuses to accept any help coming from Julia's family, but Mike convinces her against it. Once the fiasco at the police station settles down, Arnold makes Julia get in his car and leave. The pair of siblings argue about her involvement with Mike as Arnold warns that their mother wouldn't approve of it. However, Julia believes that she deserves the freedom of action in her life. On the other hand, Mike too goes through his sister's interrogation and admits to still being helpless and wanting to avoid her. Moon, like a sensible sister, announces to treat Julia a little better the next time to honor her brother's feelings for her. Sean and Moon are seen advising their cousin and brother respectively to give their relationship one more chance to see if it works, and if they find it hard to cope with each other, the experience may play an important role in their healing process. Although weird, they both find the advice quite logical and promise to think about it. On the other hand, Mike's rescue team is on another mission to stop a young girl from jumping to her death. She was a young and ambitious girl who lost her job due to her nasty boss, and instead of empathizing with her, her family was blaming her too. Adam tries to distract her and at the same time share his own life experience with her to create a sense of relatability. His team takes the chance to take all the important safety measures. He almost convinces her to give up the idea when the family downstairs starts cursing her for being useless and being the bane of her parents' existence. Already pessimistic, the girl instantly jumps down to end her life, but Adam manages to save her by jumping along and bringing her to the cushioned surface safely. However, he himself gets injured in the process and doesn't forget to scold all the people watching and passing hurtful comments. He calls them insensitive and unaware of how much hard work it is to save a life. Moon goes to her dorm room and tells Sonia what a headache her recommended supplier turned out to be for her. Her brother was even fined a heavy amount, making Sonia feel guilty. The girl suggests working together to help pay her brother's debt. On the other hand, Mike hears about Adam's fabulous performance upon returning to the rescue station and goes to him. He finally admits to having overreacted and apologizes for his misbehavior, and Adam gracefully accepts his apology. Now, with a calm mind, they promise to not allow anything to affect their friendship. They go out for a walk and engage in a lighthearted conversation. Later that night, Adam gets a text from the girl he rescued today. She expresses her gratitude to him for holding her from committing a grave mistake and promises to live her new life to its fullest. The sense of achievement makes him decide to stay one more year at station number 5. However, his girlfriend refuses to cooperate with his dreams and breaks up, triggering a meltdown. Adam tears down his application for a transfer. The next day, Mike attends a seminar on the use of robotics in rescue operations. While many of the things that Austin said make sense, Mike points out that robotics are impractical in their field for the most part. Sometimes, the soldiers have to make an immediate and delicate decision depending on the situation, which isn't possible for a robot. Austin looks quite impressed and approaches him later for a conversation, but Mike doesn't entertain him further. Later, he goes to the director of rescue operations, requesting him to approve Adam's transfer request while promising to handle the entire station on his own. However, he's surprised to learn that Adam never submitted an application requesting a transfer. On the other hand, Adam's team is seen fighting a fire emergency where he gets trapped in the building while trying to save someone. His teammates manage to rescue him, but he sustains heavy injuries. When Mike hears about it, he immediately rushes to the hospital and learns that Adam is in a critical condition. One of his hands got smashed and his face also got burn injuries. Mike gets too emotional and cries to see him in such pain. However, Adam stays strong and comforts him. His only concern is the well-being of the girl he rescued. Like him, she too got severe burn injuries. Adam keeps comforting Mike and explains that he's proud to have worked at the best rescue station. Once he's recovered enough to stand on his own feet, the department holds a ceremony in his honor. Adam is retired with many honors and badges as everyone tells him a tearful goodbye. Mike is the most emotional of all and cries it out in a hug when suddenly the fire alarm goes off. His team immediately packs up and leaves while Adam is left behind to clear their mess one last time. He leaves with uncertainty in mind when his girlfriend runs to him with flowers in her hands. The girl scolds him for giving up on their relationship so easily when she was just being angry. She goes on to confess her undying love for him, washing away all of his insecurities regarding his looks before holding his hand to walk away towards a future together. Meanwhile, Julia's mother asks her to choose someone for her blind date, and she chooses the first photograph that is shown to her. Lady Anne looks quite satisfied with her daughter's choice, Austin. This is the same person who met Mike during a seminar on robotics, and she tells her daughter to contact the man herself to decide the time and place for their date. The next day, Mike has to train new joinees alone for the first time, making him nostalgic. On the other hand, the girl rescued by Adam finally wakes up and gets traumatized to see her burnt self. She shuts out all the medical staff and refuses to see anyone. Dr. Bell tries to support her, but she calls her out on it, pointing out that she's not the one who got her face burned. Meanwhile, the fire station is notified about gas leakage in a certain apartment, and a firefighter, named Wyatt, saves the old man who has lost consciousness by the time they arrive there. However, the old man starts crying upon waking up and curses them for not letting him die. This reveals that he attempted to finish himself, and Wyatt feels hurt to have wasted his efforts for an unappreciative person. Mike notices this and decides to talk to him about it upon returning to the station. He explains that their profession is to save people no matter what response they get. Some rare cases like these shouldn't dampen their spirits. The next day, Dr. Bell approaches the burnt girl, Minnie, again to convince her for the surgery. However, she depressedly announces her wish to die rather than living such a miserable life. That is until everyone leaves her alone. Once they all walk out, Julia goes to Minnie and tells her about Adam. She convinces her to not give up so easily on a life that Adam saved by putting his own life at risk. She's told that Adam got his side profile burnt and a disabled arm, making her resilient to live for her well-wisher. When everyone gets the news about Minnie's willingness to go for a surgery, they're surprised as well as curious to learn Dr. Julia's tricks. Soon enough, one of Minnie's many surgical procedures is completed. When Arnold and Julia go home over the weekend, Julia is surprised to learn that their mother keeps an equally strict check on Arnold's account as well. The woman interrogates him for the transaction made from his account that he helped Julia pay Moon. Arnold has to lie about helping a friend in need and even protests for her strict vigilance. The lady calls it reasonable to stay updated with the life of her kids and exposes his lie by expressing that she knows about his visit to the police station. She then orders Julia to confirm a meeting place with Austin right then and there. After Julia is sent to her room, Lady Anne exposes Arnold's lie further by revealing her knowledge about him helping out Mike with the money. Arnold feels quite frustrated about the situation. Later, Julia goes to meet Austin, and they're still at the earlier stage of conversation when she receives a notification of a transaction made to her account by Mike. She immediately makes an excuse of having to go to the hospital for an emergency and leaves. Once out, she texts Mike, inviting him for dinner, and Mike agrees without much protest. He seems to be considering Moon's suggestion. He even tells his mother about his decision to open his heart to love again as well, since she is worried about him. Julia also tells her mother about having to leave early during the date and carefully probes the matter of liking someone else. However, Lady Anne threatens her calmly to not force her to repeat the history. We then learn about the reason Mike has been treating her so coldly. It's revealed that her mother had sent her to study abroad after their breakup. Poor Mike kept sending her letters but never got the response because Lady Anne never allowed them to reach her daughter. He was hurt for being treated like he never existed when in fact she didn't get a chance to contact him or hear about him. Later that evening, Julia has a heart-to-heart conversation with her father. The older man looks worried about her love life, wondering why she hasn't been able to get along with anyone from so many blind dates. Julia's revelation of still liking Mike leaves him even more anxious because he's well aware of his wife's controlling methods. He openly lays it out for her that she'll have to choose between her love and her family if she continues being adamant about Mike. This reminds Julia of the time her mother first learned about Mike. The woman had pressured her with these exact words, telling her to choose between Mike and her family. The burden was too unbearable for her, and she had decided to part ways with Mike. Now faced with the reality again, Julia asks Mike out and he doesn't deny the request. During the meal, she nervously breaches the topic of helping each other recently. She first thanks him for helping her many times recently and clarifies that with her help in Moon's case recently, they don't owe anything to each other. Mike, who was already finding it hard to trust her fearing this same outcome, doesn't protest much. He simply blames the day he fell for her at first sight, calling himself deserving of this treatment. Their conversation is interrupted with cries of help from a nearby restaurant and Mike rushes to help with the situation. He helps the staff stuck in the kitchen before taking out a girl hiding under the table in fear. She refuses to walk out of fear, so he carries her out before taking care of the fire. This girl is none other than Annie, who's instantly mesmerized by his heroic charisma. She figures that Julia is somehow associated with him and starts pestering her for his contact information. Julia doesn't tell her about their relationship and simply gives her the contact details. Annie immediately calls Mike to thank him as well as ask him out for a meal, but he doesn't entertain her and hangs up, much to Julia's satisfaction. However, Annie vows to bring him around. Mike returns to the station and takes out all of his frustration on a punching bag. He's stuck between wanting to curse Julia for reigniting the flame of hope and blaming his own luck. On the other hand, Julia decides to discuss the matter with Sean and texts him about her plan to visit him later at the bar. However, Sean is put in a tight spot with Arnold and Annie already at his office. When Julia arrives there, she's surprised to see them, and before she even gets to talk, Annie starts ranting about her unsuccessful love life. She complains about the handsome dude Mike, whom she's been requesting to meet for a meal, but he keeps refusing. Around the same time, she gets a text from Mike agreeing to have a meal together. Annie gets excited and tells about the progress, including Mike's identity, to the people present in the room. She immediately leaves to get ready while Sean and Arnold are shocked to discover who she's been vying for. Julia pretends to be strong but cries it out in the bathroom of the bar. She suddenly senses someone's presence behind and pretends to wash her face, but Sonia still notices her tears. Meanwhile, Mike's parents discuss his weird behavior and deduce that he's been like this since he went to meet Julia. They decide to keep Mike away from the girl to protect him from further pain. Meanwhile, Julia keeps drinking to forget the pain of heartbreak and gets too drunk. She leaves the bar on her own in a drunken state and refuses to let Sean and Arnold drive her home. The duo quietly follow her taxi when Arnold realizes that she's headed to Mike's home instead of her apartment. She forces her way into his home when Moon opens the door. The girl scolds her for barging into their home and asks her to leave her brother alone since he's decided to move on and go on a date. This riles her up, more so, when she watches Mike arrive there. By then, Sean also comes behind him and tries to drag her away, but Julia breaks free from his grip. She finally lets go of her pent-up feelings and calls him undeserving of her love while also pushing him for going on a date with someone else. She admits to breaking up with him under her parents' pressure as she owes them for raising her. However, she also reveals her plans to get independent so she can pursue her love and pay them back. Moreover, she calls him out for being well aware that she never moved on from him and kept trying to get back with him, but he never approached her over the years. Mike stays quiet in the face of her anger as she keeps hitting him and asking for answers until Sean drags her away. Moon tries to come out in her brother's defense to reveal the hidden truths, but Mike doesn't let her intervene as if overwhelmed by the situation. For a moment, he appears to have given up on everything before rushing after her. However, he's left to helplessly watch Arnold take his sister away in his luxury car. Their past reveals that these two most important men in Julia's life have always been at each other's throats when it comes to her. Arnold would always take her away from him. Mike is seen thinking about her outburst today. Meanwhile, Arnold is seen wanting to take Julia to their family home, and Sean suggests that he be careful with his parents, because if they discover her being drunk, it'd be a mess. Arnold laments on their past. He's always been his sister's go-to place, be it when she's scared or when she wishes to celebrate something. It's also revealed that the message that Mike left on Julia's room window to meet him at the park was actually read and removed by Arnold. The next morning, Mike decides to meet Julia and clear all of her misunderstandings. His family lets him do that on a condition that this be his last time going after her. He then calls Julia to decide the time and place for a meeting, and they decide to meet in front of her apartment. They both reach there around the same time, and Julia requests him to cook something for her. He prepares her a rice porridge while also trying to avoid the awkwardness. Mike gently probes the matter from last night, reminding her that she expressed her desire to never meet him again. He then asks her if this is what she truly wants, and Julia's face gives away her desire to stay with him. Mike gives her one last chance, telling her to take her time and decide that either they will be together or part ways forever. If she chooses the first option, he'll be her support and be by her side. He then walks away after telling her that he'll wait for her response. Julia is left to make the hardest decision of her life, because choosing Mike means giving up on her family, as they'll never accept her being with someone whom they consider indecent and below their social status. She thinks hard before finally deciding something and picks up the porridge tearfully. Later that morning, Arnold comes to pick her up to drive her to the hospital and picks on her damp mood. Julia tells him that their life is similar to the wild animals caged so long that freedom looks like a crime to them. She talks about her helplessness regarding not being able to rebel against their parents, and goes on to say that it's her who doesn't deserve a dignified person like Mike. By then, they arrive at the hospital, and Arnold looks disturbed by his sister's condition. He suggests that they move to another country, but Julia quickly denies it. Meanwhile, Lady Anne is busy golfing with the vice president of the hospital. She's the reason why Julia's colleagues avoid her, because they think she used her connections to get appointed at the hospital. On the other hand, the workers at the fire rescue station discuss the new instructor's credentials. The man comes from a wealthy background, making them question his reason for joining such a dangerous job. But they decide that it must be because he's fond of adventures, and he'd soon turn to his family business once the adrenaline wears off. This new instructor turns out to be none other than Austin, leaving Mike surprised. On Julia's end, she's excluded from the interviews selecting researchers, as everyone believes that she's not capable and used her social status to enter the hospital. However, she barges her way to the interview panel and serves them with her curriculum vitae. She insists on her capabilities, pointing out that she never turned to the back door. The panel reluctantly agrees to conduct her interview, which turns out to be successful, as she's shortlisted, much to everyone's surprise. Dr. Bell, too, is quite impressed and once again extends a hand of friendship towards her. At Mike's end, Austin is fascinated by his dog Smith and tries to pat it, but Smith scares him with a dangerous bark. The funny thing here is, Smith is Julia's family name. At night, Mike feels even more upset when Austin enters the room, taking Adam's space. He sets out for an evening walk on the tracks in his hopes of forgetting the pain associated with his best friend. He keeps ignoring Austin's efforts to spark a conversation. On the other hand, Arnold gets drunk in frustration of being watched all the time. Even Julia has refused to leave with him, or he'd prefer settling down in another country away from his mother's prying eyes. And due to the alcohol in his system, Arnold calls for a paid driver through an app, and the designated driver turns out to be Sonia. The girl admits to working 2 part-time jobs to cover her expenses and to pay her student loan. Arnold pays her some extra amount and tells her to get a cab to go back, but the girl takes out her bike from the car trunk and leaves in it, thus saving the little amount. The next day, Austin is once again left stunned to discover all the boys working out hard. He talks to Mike about it and expresses his concern that they may get too tired to perform well in time of need. Mike disagrees, pointing out the hardships they may encounter on the rescue missions. He argues that strength training gives them enough stamina to walk through those hurdles instead of collapsing down. As the lunch hour ticks in, the fire station receives a big amount of food delivered as a thank you meal sent by one of the survivors from their rescue operations. However, the boys are in for a disappointment, as Mike refuses to accept it, reminding them their rule of #no thank you gifts. At this time, Austin steps in to their rescue, promising to not repeat the mistake, but at the same time reminding him that they can't waste the food. Mike reluctantly allows them to go ahead with the meal. He then steps out to call Annie and scolds her for sending that food. He expresses his desire of having nothing to do with her and tells her that her friend Julia is his first love. This leaves Annie shocked before she rushes to meet Julia. The girl confronts her for hiding the fact that Mike is her ex-boyfriend and announces that onwards she won't have anything to do with him. She goes on to explain that the boyfriends and ex-boyfriends of her friends are the no-go area for her, while Julia apologizes for keeping the fact from her. Annie senses the pair's unending love for each other and encourages Julia to go for it, even if that means going against her family. On the other hand, Austin faces trouble from the young trainees as some of them refuse to acknowledge him in Adam's space. They believe that he'll give up soon, courtesy of his wealthy background. More so, he's unfamiliar with their way of training as other fire stations don't do such rigorous training. He therefore decides to accompany them to the routine and runs around the mountain track with a heavy bag at his back. But compared to other soldiers, he faces trouble in completing the mission on time and gets left behind. After everyone arrives back at the station except Austin, they wait for him for a few hours but eventually get worried when the weather suddenly gets worse. They're about to set out in his search when he finally reaches the station. The man has pushed his limits to prove his dedication, which is noticed by almost everyone, including Mike. Austin admits to Wyatt that he wanted to prove his resilience and dedication to this fire station. He later returns to his room to find some ointments left by Mike for his injured feet. Meanwhile, Julia returns home to find her mother sitting in her lounge. The woman brought her some food and praises her for keeping the apartment clean when in fact her real purpose of the surprise visit is to see if she's allowed anyone to her home. Julia also knows that and requests to be left some freedom of action. However, Lady Anne gets back to her toxic attitude, revealing that she's aware of her visit to the police station for Mike's sister. She proudly reminds her that Moon is a questionable girl, just like her brother, which caused her to land in the hands of law. Julia nearly loses her composure at this comment and mentions how she's been holding herself back from wanting Mike back in her life just to please her. Moreover, the only time she truly felt the comfort of home was when Mike cooked her a rice porridge in this same apartment. To this, Lady Anne threatens her with all the favors she has done to her till date. The woman calls her a hypocrite for feeling indebted to him just because he fed her rice porridge once, while they have been looking after all her needs for a long time. Amongst the comfort and luxuries provided to her, she lists the apartment, her car, and even the job at the hospital. Julia intervenes, crediting the job to her capabilities, but the lady dismisses her claims. She reminds her that her family name played a crucial role in landing a job at such a prestigious hospital. She then tells her to be an obedient child and leaves. On the other hand, the fire station looks lively with the most recent batch of trainees doing their assessments. One of the soldiers gets injured during the process and his comrades carry him to his room so he can rest. As a payment, they take his charcoal masks, one each, and this is how Austin finds them. The situation leads to a fun conversation and they request Austin to talk to Mike on their behalf, so he allows them to take on real missions. However, Mike clearly denies the request, saying he can't risk their lives with half-baked training since the missions are too dangerous sometimes. During this conversation, Austin also tells him to reconsider his evaluation of himself because being a rescue fighter is truly his passion. Mike seems to already have realized that, so he lightly smiles in response. Meanwhile, Moon and her friends are anxious about job hunting as they're at the verge of completing their studies. One of them even jokingly mentions getting a rich boyfriend that'd take care of all of their financial problems. It just so happens that Arnold finds Sonia's student card in his car and drops it at the university student affairs department. Sonia hears about it and comes out to thank him in person, but he doesn't respond with much enthusiasm. On the other hand, Mike slowly starts opening up to Austin. They discuss how they chose their professions and Austin reveals that despite coming from a well-off family, his father encouraged him to choose the field that really makes him happy. Now, the mention of father reminds Mike of his own real father. His father was a supervisor at a construction site in the year 1999. Due to some unforeseen circumstances, a lot of labor workers were laid off without settling their accounts, causing a wave of anxiety amongst the workers. As the leader, he too was worried about his people, even though his own job was secure. The man united the labor force to peacefully protest against the Smith builders, igniting Lady Anne's fury. The woman gathers all the stakeholders and demands that the laid-off workers shouldn't be paid at any cost since they caused defamation to their company. Moreover, she vows to teach Mr. Albert a lesson for going against them. Meanwhile, Mike's mother is shown as a selfish, ambitious woman who likes to visit the bars at night. The couple often quarrels about his low income and how she doesn't wish to give up her freedom for his sake. A few days later, Mr. Albert's friend and colleague, who was protesting by his side, retraces his steps in the matter and even puts allegations of bribery on him under Lady Anne's instructions. Mr. Albert is fired from his position, followed by his wife walking out on him and their son with a rich man. Poor Mike runs after the car, carrying her away until she disappears. Following the incident, Mr. Albert gives in to excessive drinking, leaving Mike to manage the household and look after him. He often returns late and one night doesn't come back at all. Mike wakes up at midnight to find his bed empty and sets out to look for him. However, he doesn't have to look too far as the man is sleeping at the door of their home but due to extreme cold, has succumbed to death. The chapter of Mike's painful past closes there for the time being as he comes back to the present in his room.